Hello and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about cold air intakes. Now I've seen a lot of people on both sides of the fence on cold air intakes. They're worth it, they're not worth it, all that. Now, I'm going to throw my 2 cents on there, give my opinion about it, try to help all of you out. Now, are cold air intakes worth it? Yes and no. And there's a bunch of factors that go into it. It's not just a simple fact of car doesn't need it, car needs it, you only need it for racing, you only need it for this, whatever. It's not as simple as that. There's a bunch of other factors in there we'll talk about. The first thing is brand. Now, brand has a big part to do with this. Now, I see a lot of people buy the cheap Chinese ones off eBay, and I'm going to say most of the time those aren't even worth it at all, because those companies aren't putting the time, effort, and research in them to actually make them efficient. Now, a lot of people will put a cold air intake in there for performance or fuel mileage or drivability or whatever, but cheap Chinese ones, they don't put the development into them to get the most out of them. Now, a lot of people think that once they put one of those on, they're faster, but honestly they're just louder, so it makes it sound like you're going faster. Sometimes it does not work with the factory computer or tune, and it can cause problems. And so that's why I say the cheap Chinese ones are not worth it at all. The only ones I'll ever go with are Volant and K&N. Now, there's a lot more time, research, and development put in those, such as, for example, K&N. If you look at their website, they're always looking for a unmodified vehicle to come into their shop so they can develop a cold air intake for it. And it's usually a newer car, but they do that every year. And the reason they do this is so they can design, develop, and engineer an air intake system that will work with that car that is unmodified. That way it works with the factory computer, factory tune, and all that. That way it sits in there right, the proper fitment, proper design, and for the most part emissions, because they do have some that can pass certain emissions and some can't. So they do quite a bit of testing, and then they dyno test it and make sure that it did gain horsepower. So, and the factor really comes down to is it worth it or not? Depends on gain versus cost, in my opinion. Now, when you go to K&N or Volant, you're always going to get a gain. So they're always worth it, but is it worth it due to cost? And I'll show you this real quick. This is K&N's horsepower guarantee. So every intake they sell has been dynometered and proven to increase horsepower. We measure horsepower at the wheels. Horsepower rating that may have been on the window sticker when your car is new is a measurement of horsepower at the engine, and there is often a lost horsepower through the drivetrain by that time it reaches the wheels. So what K&N does is they have their DynoJet research, and they do a before and after to the rear wheels, if you can see that, with their intake system. So they bring in the car that they're going to use, dyno it, then develop, design, and test the cold air intake, and then dyno it again. So if you want a cold air intake, it's best to go to someone like that. That way you know it's going to work with your stock setup, and you won't have any problems. Now, it does cost more, but you pay for you get what you pay for, as always. But now, where the factor comes in, is it really worth it? See, like this is actually for a 2015 Ford Mustang GT, and it is showing an increase of 19.25 horsepower to the rear wheels and 16.75 foot-pounds of torque. Now, is that worth about $380? It's very possible. And especially if you're going to do modifications in the long run. So, 20 horsepower to the rear wheels is actually more than 20 to the engine. So $300 for 20 horsepower to the rear wheels is not that bad of a deal on a stock setup. Now, if you're changing stuff over later, or have already changed stuff over on the motor, such as exhaust, cam, any of that, well, that's a no-brainer. Then you want that. But now, some factors where it doesn't come in very well, as let's say the Sunfire we did a cold air intake on. Now, I believe it was 7 horsepower gain. Now, is that worth, I think it was $325 for the kit? No, 7 horsepower, $325, that's not worth it. And so now you see where is a cold air intake worth it, price versus gain. Because for 7 horsepower to the rear wheels, we got more on other items to increase that power. But where cost versus gain comes in really handy is we actually bought a used cold air intake setup for the Sunfire for $20. So was the 7 horsepower gain to the rear wheels worth $20? Yes, definitely. So that is probably something you want to look into. I mean, if you're getting 20 horsepower to the wheels or 7 horsepower, is it worth it to you? You may want to do bargain shopping. I mean, bartering, look around for good deals, and you can get horsepower cheaper. So therein, is the cold air intake worth it for 7 horsepower? No, it wasn't brand new, but used and cheaper, yes it was. And there was still a gain. But now, what a lot of people don't see is stuff like, yes, K&N is not really a true cold air intake setup. I was thinking like Volant is, because their setup is a little bit different and better. But there's still gains on both of them. Now, I got some of the what was left of the Sunfire, and what a lot of people don't see is just how much there is to it, because I will grab the stock setup and show you real quick what it looks like. Now, throttle body connects under there to the air box. And down to this. So you can see there's a lot of restriction in this setup. So you see with stock setup, sometimes there is a lot of restrictions. Now sometimes there isn't, like on our 04 Grand Am GT. K&N does not make a cold air intake for it. So one, I'm not buying a cheap Chinese knockoff. And two, honestly, with the ram air package on this, and a little bit of modification I've done to it, if you haven't seen in the previous video where I modified it just a little bit, where I took this piece that is under the fender that most people don't see, and I put some ducting down there that would pull the air from a different part of the car closer to better and more fresh air, which was an improvement, and that was less than $20. But also on that, and I'll show you right here, is another reason why it's not really worth it to change to a cold air intake on something like this. Because one, K&N doesn't make a cold air intake for it, so which tells me that with their design work, there's actually no gains that they could find other than making a high flow filter for the air box. Now, for the most part, every time you buy a cold air intake system, you usually get aluminum tubing that will replace all of the restrictive rubber and plastic parts with all the bends and everything in them, from your throttle body all the way to the filter. Now on a car like this, that's it right there. Throttle body, mass airflow sensor, airbox. There's not really a whole lot there to replace, not even really worth it. You might be able to put a piece of aluminum straight tube in there, but the gains are going to be so inefficient that you're not even probably going to see it. And then once you add the ram air package here and custom ductwork I did there anyway, and the stock setup actually on this car is not bad. As you saw, it's not as restrictive as the other, so it's still not a bad setup. Something like this, just putting a high flow air filter in it, well, that was good enough. So now that's one of the few rare occasions that cold air intake is not worth it. But in all reality, truthfully, they don't make a cold air intake for the car. Some people are going to argue because you can find them on eBay, but they're the cheap Chinese knockoffs, which we're not even going to get into. Especially since all the ones I've seen, the filter is here exposed, and that's not a cold air intake. You're sucking in all the hot air in from the engine, and it just makes the car louder, makes it sound like you're going faster. Now here's my opinions on it. So for me, for the most part, it always is worth it if they make a cold air intake for the vehicle to have one on it. But that's only from a known and well brand. Because if I bought a cold air intake, I do want to guarantee that increased horsepower. I like that. And I like the fact that if you're stock, you can put one on without having to do a tune, without having to modify anything to make it work. And also, for the simple fact that, yes, you can put a cold air intake on it now and gain a little bit of power, but if you want to start changing cams, exhaust, and all that, it's still going to work with that too, because it's just a giant air pump. The more air it takes in, the more it releases, you know, so it works. So is a cold air intake worth it? Yes, but only for the right price. And that just depends on what you're going to do. And again, the 7 horsepower gain was not worth it unless the price was right at $20. But 20 horsepower to the rear wheels, $385, it's worth it, especially if that's what you're going for, if you're going for performance, and if you're going to be making more power later with other bolt-ons and add-ons. Now hopefully this information proved helpful to you, and as always, thanks for watching.